Hi and welcome back to this tutorial series on creating C++ plugins for Cinema 4D. Now before we get back into the dialog stuff, I want to just change out this GePrint that we put in the last tutorial, because at the time I said this is deprecated, and again if we right click and go to declaration, we'll see that it says this is deprecated. That means it's going to be removed at some point. Cinema 4D is going to remove it. So we want to make sure that we can put something in here that is going to continue on last. So what we're going to add is application output. It's going to change that text to application output. I'm going to do it for all of these. So we're no longer using GePrint, we're going to use application output. And let's just check that that works. So I'm just going to Control-Shift-B and make sure I compile everything there. And I'm just running in debug there. And I showed you how to debug in lesson 4. At the end of the lesson, we learned how to debug. And now if I come up to extensions and go to console, and I start clicking these buttons, we're going to see that it now outputs to there. So that's good. We got rid of that GePrint. That's an old way of doing it. And Maxon is slowly replacing all of the old ways, all the old code that's been around for many years, might even be 20 or 30 years, and they're updating everything. So eventually lots of this will all change, but as it improves, you got to make sure you just, if you can at least, start updating and using the new methods that they bring out, because they will remove some of the old stuff as they go along. So now that we've got these buttons, let's just add a few more other items to this dialog that just to flesh it out a bit, just so you can see how you add extra things to this dialog. So I'm just going to right click on add button and go to definition. Actually, I'll go to declaration, and I'm just going to see what else we've got here. Okay, add checkbox. We'll add a couple of checkboxes. Okay, so we're going to go in, we're going to say add an ID up here, and we'll just call it checkbox, if I can spell, checkbox 1, and I'll put checkbox 2 in there as well, and we'll add a couple of checkboxes. Add checkbox IDC checkbox 1, and we're gonna leave that. Well, I'll put the same thing in here, but a checkbox is not going to scale, but that's okay. And might just leave these as 0 actually and see what happens there. And I will give this a name, and we'll call it checkbox capital B 1, and then we'll just do the same for 2, and we'll see how that looks. So I'm just going to run that. A lot of this, working with dialogues, you just got to experiment a bit. So here I'm actually questioning just if those items are actually needed and how they might lay themselves out. So you can see there, even though I had 0 as the size, it still comes in at at a normal size. It doesn't resize these, and it's aligned them to the left, but we might want these maybe in the center. So let's just add a few more little things there and see if it actually changes it, because it might not. And I can get into the details of really trying to make this work how you want if you were to design it. Oh, we don't want that at all. We want BFH center. That's what we want. And I'm going to put another button in here because I just want it to be, I want this dialog to kind of be symmetrical. I'll go button 6. Actually, I'll remove button 5 for this. So I'm just going to go up. I'm going to remove everywhere they've got button 5, just because I don't want to use that anymore. And now we'll run that. So now we'll have still 2 columns. We'll have 4 buttons followed by 2 checkboxes, and we'll just see if this center actually does anything. And you can see now it's centered there. Now perhaps we wanted these to be on the right for some reason, or the left. So let's just try that as well, just to see if they work as well. Left, and make this one right. And now we'll just run that and see what that looks like. And now we can see there one is on the left and the other is on the right. So that just shows how you can add checkboxes. Now let's actually make these do something. But first I'm going to put that back to center because I want these to be centered. I think it looks a lot nicer. And now I want to detect if these are changed. And just for consistency, actually, I'm going to put this at the bottom. I'm putting 2 in there, and I've got 2 checkboxes. And we'll just, and the break needs to be inside the checkbox, inside the brackets there. Now, if you're wondering how I'm doing this, that's just holding down Control, or holding down Control lets me jump around the editor based on the words with the arrow keys. And if you hold down Shift and press up, it's going to select. And if you hold down Control and Shift, you can select text like that as well. So that's just an easy way to select, just using the keys. Don't have to use the mouse. And so I'm going to change this to checkbox 1, and I'll just copy that, put a K in there, bit pedantic on my spelling, and checkbox 2, and let's just see here. I'll just put in a breakpoint there, and now we'll press play. And so now if I change this, it's gonna go in here and say, well, it's saying it's pushed. Undo that and just continue. So we know that that's getting the input, but how do we get this actual value? So how do we do something when that's actually checked? But before we get to that, I want to add down here a couple more things. I'm going to add 2 strings. String, I'll call it message 1 and message 2. Now what I want is to add some text to this dialog underneath each of these. So I'm going to use the ID that I created. So this is going to be some text, and you use the word static text there. And I'm just going to center this as well. So I'm going to center that same text. The width and the height. I'm going to make this 200. I should actually try and make it scale, but we'll just hard code it in a number there at the moment. And I'm not going to put any text in there at all. And then I'm going to leave the border style just as 0. And I'm going to paste that in again. So we're going to have 2 of these. But I need that message to be message 2. Now, what I want to happen is when I click the first checkbox, I want to set the text of this to say that this checkbox has been pressed. So to do that now, what we need to do first is we need to get the state of the checkbox. Now the checkboxes are Boolean values. So I'm just going to have a Boolean value there of false. So a bool is a yes, no, or a true, false. In logical terms, it's true or false. And we're just calling this variable checked. And currently it's set to false. So checked right now, where my cursor is, this value, if we were to look at it, it would be false. And now we want to get the value of that checkbox. Now these checkboxes are Boolean values, so we can just call getBool, and we pass in the ID of that checkbox, and then we pass in that value there. So you can copy that and just paste it in there if you want. What that's going to do is it's going to try and it's going to look through this dialog and see if there's anything in there which has this ID. Now this ID is just a number. It's going to be 1001, 2, 3, 4. It's going to be 1004. Next one's 1005. So it's going to look for that ID within the dialog, and it's going to try and get a Boolean value from it. And if it can, then the value was retrieved. And if it can't, then it couldn't do anything. So we can actually check for that as well. So we can go if, put an if around this. So we're wrapping it in curly in brackets there. So we know that if it does successfully retrieve that value, then we can now set the text. So we can go set string, because these messages are strings. So again, we get the ID of that piece of text, which is just an area on screen, like a checkbox is or a button is. This is a physical area on screen. It's actually going to be 200 by 20 centered in the layout, and it's going to have a piece of text which has currently got nothing in it, and we want to set that text. So we're going to say set string, and we're going to look down here to see what we've got. This is the one we're trying to fill in here, and so we're just going to say checkbox 1 checked, and I'm going to leave the rest of the parameters as empty. You'll find if you look in a lot of other code, they sometimes don't check this either. So in this case, if it couldn't find the checkbox, then it's not going to alter this value. So that's always going to be false. So in that case, you don't really need to check if this returns successfully, but you can do that for your own coding if you want to and be a bit more rigorous. But if you don't, then the value, if it doesn't find it, it's just going to leave it as it is, so false. So now we're going to use what's called an if statement. So we're going to go if. This is just like asking a question of anyone. You're asking C++, if that is checked, if this value is true, if this is yes, if it's true. If it's true, then it's going to do the code, it's going to run the code within these curly brackets. And that's actually where we want to put this set string. So we only want to set that string when it's checked. Or we want it to only set it to that piece of text. Else, open bracket, curly bracket, we're just going to clear that. So I'm putting the same thing in here, but I'm going to empty that again. So now what this does is when a user comes in, clicks that checkbox, this is going to come back, and that's going to come back true, meaning the checkbox is checked. And now we're asking it, is it checked? If that checked is true, so if it's true, which is what this open bracket, close bracket does, whatever inside, if that ends up being a true statement, it will run the code within the curly brackets. So it's going to call set string, and it's going to look up the ID of that string on the screen, and it's going to set it to this. So let's just give this a go, okay, and see if this works. Pressing F5 to same thing as clicking that button up there, pressing F5. It does a compile, and then it runs Cinema 4D and attaches to it and allows us to debug. And we can actually come through, and let's just put a breakpoint in here as well. And now I'm going to check checkbox 1. So we've hit our breakpoint, and let's step through it using this, which is F10 on your keyboard as well. So right now I can hover over this because we're on this line here, so it hasn't called that function yet, and we hover over that and we can see it's false. And if you look down here in this autos area, you got locals as well as autos, so you could be on locals, and if you wanted you could be on watched as well, and you could actually double click and drag that in and it will just watch for that wherever you are in your debugging. But we're going to go to locals, and this also is what you're seeing here. We've got the checked value is false as well, so you can hover over these in Visual Studio, or you can just look there as well. And you can see our ID is 1004, which is that, and we can hover over this one. We can see this is 1006 as well. So if it's checked, then it's going to do something. So we want to go another step forward, and now we've called that, and it's come back true. So it's got the value from the checkbox, and it said this value is true. So now we're going to display some text. So we're going to call set text, and now I'm going to click. Just going to add another breakpoint in here, which will get hit if it's not checked. So if we uncheck it, we should get that hit. So I'm going to click continue. It's going to go back to Cinema 4D, and you can see it's now displayed some text under there. Checkbox 1 is checked. So if I check that again, now we're hitting our breakpoint. So it's no longer checked, it's false. I'm going to remove that breakpoint, and I'm going to continue. What I should do now is remove the string, or set it to empty. And now you can see there's no text. So if I did that again now, remember we've got no breakpoints anymore. Checked, not checked, checked, not checked. So now you've got some logic there to detect if a checkbox is on or off. So I'm going to stop that. And I'm going to do the same thing. Copy this bit here and just put it in for number 2. So we can have 2 of these checkboxes. Changing that to a 2. Changing the message to 2. And also changing the checkbox there to 2 as well, because it's this one. Pressing save, run that. Now we should have 2 checkboxes that will display messages when they are checked. Here we go. There we go. Beautiful. Just taking a while to shut down Cinema 4D there. Just let it do its thing until you're here. Now, what else can we add? So to figure that out, I'm just going to come up to here, and I'm just going to type add. And we can have a look. We've got quite a few different things we can add. We've added buttons, we've added checkboxes, color choosers, combo boxes, and combo buttons. These might be actually interesting to do. I might do that right now actually. You got numbers, sliders, radio buttons, sliders. So we could add a slider. I'll add a slider first. So we add a slider here, and I'm going to give it the ID. I'm going to make this scale to take up the size. Actually, what I want here is I want this slider to go the entire way along. Okay, I don't want it to be in just one side of a column. I want to have a slider going the whole way across. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another group. I'm just going to keep the same style there. Come down here, create a new group. I have to put group end at the end of it there. And I'm going to change this to, actually I'm going to remove the text from there. And I'm going to remove that border as well. I don't want to have a border on this one, but I'm going to keep the spacing around it so that the spacing is the same as this one. And now I'm going to take my slider, I'm going to put it into my second group. And this slider is going to scale fit. And I just can leave the initial width at 90 and initial height as well. And I want to set the default value of this slider to 50%. So what I'm going to do here is go set float. So I believe sliders are floating values. We'll know if I'm wrong later on. I'm going to set it to 0.5. So this is again saying look through the document, find the value for that slider and set it to 0.5. But we shouldn't be doing it right here. So I'm kind of doing a few things in this step here. There's actually an init method of a dialog where we can use it to set default values. And to make that work, I'll show you what the definition looks like. So we come over to the header file, right click, go to definition, and if we scroll down a little bit, we've got init values. When the dialog is initialized by the GUI. So override this to initialize local variables and gadgets, which is exactly what we want to do. So I'm going to put that in up here. I'm going to go to the CPP file. I'm going to put it in just up here and copy that, put that in front, remove the virtual, remove the void as well, because remember we got those errors in the last one. I'm going back to the header file now. I'm going to remove void there as well. And now I'm going to call that set float from in here and return true to tell Cinema 4D that we had no problems initializing our values. Everything's fine. Continue. And that should be all. So what should happen now is we should have a slider that will appear and it will be initialized to a value of 0.5. Now there won't be any identifier actually telling us what the slider is for. So because of that, what we could do is we could either put some static text in front of it, but just for now, I'm actually going to put that back in, and I am going to give it some text so that it kind of is another way of identifying it. You'll see what I mean when I run this, and we'll just see if this all works. I'm just going to build it first. And now I'm running it. And you should have now two groups, one above the other. One has two columns, and the next group has one column. And you can see here that the group is scaling all the way vertically as well. This one here has got enough space just to allow it to put its extra static texts in there, and then the next group is started immediately. But for this, we don't want it to be have this group all the way. It would be nice if this group just kind of came underneath that. I'm not sure if our slider got initialized correctly there either, so we'll just look at that and we'll check that as well. But first, I just want to fix that group up because that stuff kind of annoys me a little bit. So let's go vertical. Let's change that to fit. And let's just see how that looks. You can see how it might take quite a while to get things looking how you want. And you can see now that this dialog is, because it's got the scale, it's decided to take up all the space. But this test slider here is now compact. And it actually does have a value of 0.5 now, but that might have been, I don't know if it did our initialization there or not. I'm just going to leave that like that and close that. And let's just go up here and we'll change our slider value to 0.9. But what I'm going to do now is just double check this. Okay, it's always good to double check this and have this documentation open. So we're going to developers.maxon.net, open up the documentation, and we're going to go add slider. Add slider. That doesn't really give me much information at all. Okay, so that's not giving me much information in here, telling me what it is or anything. It's a little bit lacking in some cases, but otherwise the documentation is excellent. But you just find a few places which might not have the information that you want. So let's just actually search our code. So I'm going to select add slider and the open bracket and search the entire solution there. And we may come up with another place where it's actually being used. So got one here, add slider. And this is an example in the Cinema 4D SDK. You can see the path there if you were to go in the source file. So I'm just going to, here we go, that's the problem I had. I was calling set float, but I should have been calling set %. Okay, and it's actually doing this immediately after calling add slider as well. Although this is an interesting dialogue in what it does, so you can't follow a lot of this stuff exactly, but calling set % should do what I'm after here. So I'm going to come up here and go set %, and I've got it set to 90 at the moment, so it should be up in that 90 range. Let's actually have a look at this and see what that does. Same as set float. But here we can see now that's up roughly around 90. Now, what I want to do is actually just change this so that it actually shows the number as well as the slider. Or I might add a second one straight after it. So let's go and call this slider 2, giving it an ID. And now I want to add a slider 2. I'm going to give it a value as well. Set percentage slider 2, we'll give it 0.2. And now I want to add, I'll just type the words in, add edit slider. And we give it the number, the ID, slider 2. And we'll give it the same scale fit value. So now we're going to have two sliders. One's just going to be a slider by itself. The second one's going to have a number next to it with a little up-down arrow, so you can change the number, and you can actually type the number in manually. And let's just run that. Just having a look at the definition there. And so now we have two sliders side by side, which is not what I was wanting. But the first one doesn't have an edit field, the second one does, and it says 20% there. So sliders are in a percentage, so it'll show the value from 0% to 100%. But the value is a value between 0 and 1. So you can see here, that's why we added the 0.2. That's 20%. 0.9, that's 90%. Now, the reason it was in 2 columns instead of 1 is because I copied and pasted this, remember? But I should have set that to 1. So let's just stop and start that up again. And now we'll see we've got two separate lines there. Now let's say we wanted to add text to the start of these to give these kind of a name. And I'm just hard stopping it by clicking that red button up there, but it's the same as shutting down Cinema 4D. You can do either or, whichever one you prefer. So now I'm just going to copy these, and I'm going to go slider underscore text. And I'm going to copy that and put it under here as well. So I want to have two text, static text pieces right next to those sliders. I'm going to copy these two ones from our group above. I'm going to put one before this slider and one before the second slider. I need to make sure that I change my text. We call this slider text. We call this one slider to text. I'm going to call that value A, value B, but now I do want 2 columns. So I'm going to say 2. I want this to be on the right, and I want that to scale and fit. Let's just see what happens when we do this. We should have a piece of text, value A next to a slider, and then a value B next to another slider. See them there, but they're not quite aligned how I wanted them to be aligned. So let's see if we can try and fix that up. So firstly, I've got a value of 200 in there. I'm going to make that smaller. And I'm going to go or BFH fit and put that on there as well. I'm actually unsure if this will work. As I said before, it can take a bit of fiddling to get the UI to look how you want as a design. And that's still not quite right. I think I just shrunk the size down by changing the number. I'm not sure if the fit had any impact, but at least that gives you an idea of how you can kind of change it a little bit. Now, last thing that we'll do just before this video finishes is get those values of that text box, and we will do something with it. So I'm going to come down, I'm going to copy IDC slider, and I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to copy all of this, including the case, just put it underneath there, and replace that with the slider. Now what I'm doing here, this is how copy-paste bugs come about, right? Because people copy and paste, but they don't. I'll just say slider 1 changed. And this is actually a float 32. And what a float is, let's call that value equals 0. What a float value is a decimal number. So a float is a value that's like 0 point something, 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 okay? And if you're in Cinema 4D and you see something called an int, which is an integer, or perhaps it's an int 32, that's a whole number. So it's a number like, whoops, not letters, it's just a number, you know, like this. Whereas a float allows you to have decimals. There's also a float 64, and what you can do by default is just leave it as the word float, and that defaults to the 64-bit, and you don't need to worry about any of that. But just think of it as a way of having fractions, decimal numbers. It can be a whole number as well, so it's just allows you to have a decimal point. And let's just set that to a value of 0 for now, and we're going to go get float. We're going to get the float value, which may be a decimal number, which it will be a decimal number, because you remember up here on the set percentage we had 0.9 and 0.2. And we're going to pass in value there. So now we want to do something when that changes, and what I might do just for this test here is when this changes, I'm going to change those text boxes above it as well. So just so that we can see something happening. Actually, in saying that, I'm not happy with that. I will add another. Let's just add a third message in here. Message 3. Let's just make this clean so that we know what we're doing. So I'm going to copy that. Basically, I'm just copying, pasting things around a little bit. And I'm going to put us straight under here. Now, this is obviously just going to be on one side because we've got a 2 column now. It's going to be in the first column. So I'm taking that message 3. I hope you followed along with what I just did there. I was essentially just grabbing the line and the ID there. So add static text IDC message 3. We will leave it as centered. We'll just leave that exactly as it is. And now I can scroll down, and where we had that set string for this one, I'm just going to go 3. And I'm actually going to take this out of here and put it up there. And I don't need any of this because we're not checking if a value is true or not. We just want to change the text. But what I want is to display that text. So I'm going to do that by creating another string. And now a string is a piece of text. And I'm going to call it message. This is going to be equal to this text here plus, now I want to add the value, slider equals, and then we'll just put the number straight afterwards. So this is in the open quotes, close quotes. This is the piece of text that we want to display on screen. It's going to have slider, then a space, then the equals. And now I want to get that value and display that value as well. So we can do that by going string with a lowercase t, colon, float to string. We open bracket. And now we just pass in that value. And by default, it's going to have a few digits after it and 1 digit in front of it. And we just leave that like that. But we've got a problem there. No, we don't have a problem. Okay, it's compiled, okay. And we just take that message and we pass that in here. Now you might be asking yourself, why don't we have that underscore s up here? It's just in this case we don't need to, because the underscore s kind of tells it it's actually one of these strings. So we're doing this now. We're saying we want a message which is going to have this piece of text in it plus that float value, that decimal number, converted into a piece of text for us. And then we want to display it in the message there. And now this is only going to appear as soon as we start changing that slider. Now remember, we've got 2 sliders, so I'm going to create one of these for the second slider. And we've got slider 2, and I'll just put a number up here, slider 1, slider 2, but I'm going to reuse that same message. Okay, I'm not going to have 2 different messages. I'm just going to reuse that same message. So if we change one, it's going to set it. If we change the other, it's going to set that same message. And I think that's good enough for now. So let's just build that. Now I am, as you may have noticed, I am kind of speeding up a little bit with the way I'm kind of approaching some of the code now, because hopefully you're kind of familiar with a few things by now, like the curly brackets, the open and close brackets, some of this syntax and how to find things if you wanted to look more into some of these methods and see what other things are there. I need to build that. I need to run that. But I still will go over in detail anything new that we add. But now we're just kind of experimenting a little bit. So now you can see we've got some space under here because of the message where it's going to appear right there. So if I was to move this, we see slider equals, let's go in the middle, it's a 0.5. But if I was to move this one, it will now say 20. Slider 2 is 20%. It's 1. So it's saying 1, which again, between 0 and 1, 1 means 100%. 0.5 means 50%, as you can see there. Now with this one here, I can also press up and down on these little arrows. You can also click and hold the arrow and move your mouse up and down. or you can just type the value in directly, go 20. And either way, it'll update. Okay, so that's enough for today. It was 40 minutes, it was a bit long. So today you added checkboxes, you added static text to your screen, you got the value of the checkbox and made it do something on screen. You've also added 2 sliders, one with an edit text and one just with a normal slider again, and you've added some text there as well as a descriptive. And you've put these into another group, so now you've got 2 groups. And you've also been able to get that float value from that slider and do something with it and display it on screen. So we'll just leave that there for today. Okay, thanks.